All right, man. Let's talk about it, man. I seen a short on Woolworth Sports a couple weeks ago about Ndamukong speaking about why he didn't come back to Detroit, and we chalked it up as them being cheap. But he said some things, and he's talked about this multiple times to a certain extent. And for the most part of what he said was that he wanted to be paid more than Matthew Stafford at the time, who was on a $54 million deal. $41.5 million was guaranteed. It was a 3-year deal. And he felt like, Stafford was kind of the face of the defense, or the head of the offense, but he was the face of the defense, and he deserved to get more money than Matthew Stafford, and the Lions didn't value him that way. You got to understand this. I think Mr. Ford was still the owner. You got to look at his history, man. He was very he didn't care for people that look like Ndamukong. You can look at the history of him, and you can, a lot of them, they come from that same train of thought. Martha seemed to be a little bit different, and women tend to be more compassionate, and they tend to be a little bit more willing to break the cycle of things pertaining to that nature. More times than not, you kind of see more of them venture off into interracial dating than the guys. The guys seem to be a little bit more indoctrinated, and they'll venture off too. But just to kind of make my point is to the fact that Matthew Stafford was allowed to get traded, and Calvin never would have got that opportunity, or never got that opportunity. Barry never got that opportunity. I seen the city of Detroit get mad at Barry, but you got to look at it for what it was. He been here, he gave blood, sweat, and tears, and he wanted to be able to go somewhere else to win. And Detroit didn't give him that shot, and wasn't gonna give him that shot. So why shouldn't we be happy to see him move on? Why shouldn't he have the opportunity to move on? I know it hurt to see 20 in a different jersey, but think about it. He's a human being at one point, and I feel like he should have been allowed to go elsewhere. And I think same thing for Calvin Johnson. He should have been allowed to go elsewhere. Y'all didn't put the proper team around him to do so. So they both walked away, and I think it had to do a lot about how they looked. And Matthew Stafford, not only did he get to veto a trade to the Carolina Panthers, he basically they did right by him and traded him to the Rams. And nobody ever gives flack to Matthew Stafford for quitting on the Detroit Lions. I always bring that he quit. But no, he gave it his all. He wasn't going to win here. It was another rebuild. Okay, then why then? And I'm not talking to this generation. I remember I was growing up. A lot of people in the city, who was mad at Barry Sanders for making that decision for himself. Right? But the same thing that we were saying about Barry making that decision for herself, they saying about Stafford being able to make that decision for himself. Oh, he gave his blood. No. They should go every way. So, I that's one of the things that I always had against the Lions organization. Because I see things from a certain perspective, a logical perspective. But Ndamukong thinking he was bigger than the program, bigger than Stafford. That's why I said that. Stafford was allowed to leave when the greatest Detroit Lion, Barry Sanders, and leave and go where he wanted to go. And Sue didn't know this at the time, but looking at the history of the Force, you knew this then. If you know. He was allowed to leave, and and go, where he wanted to go, because he vetoed the trade or said, I ain't going to Carolina. He was allowed to go to where he wanted to go. So thinking he was going to get a bigger deal from Detroit than they quarterback, it wasn't going to happen. It is what it is. It wasn't going to happen. So, he had double-digit sacks his rookie year. I think one of his last years in Detroit, he had 8.5 sacks. He never got close to double-digit sacks again in his career. At Miami, he made one Pro Bowl. Didn't have an impact, but he got the no-stake taxes. He got the money. And for the most part, they didn't do anything in Miami from what I remember him going down there to Miami doing it. I think he ended up winning the Super Bowl in Tampa. And I'm not sure if he won one in L.A. I don't think he was on that team in L.A. that won the Super Bowl. I think he might have won one in LA. I could be wrong. He won one in LA, and maybe they won one in Tampa, maybe he won two. I don't remember, but he never was that dominant force that he was in Detroit. He never recaptured that. He got his money, which is what most people care about, but he never was the face of the Dolphins. He never was the imprint of the Dolphins. Sue and that dominant nastiness that, he was in Detroit. He never was the face of Miami. He never was the face of LA or the Rams. He never was the face of the Bucks like he was in Detroit. He never got that same love again. He understand it. He never got treated the same way again. He never was the cornerstone of another franchise. They might have paid him as a cornerstone, but he never had that impact ever again in his career, and he knows it. But he got his money, so. But thinking it was going to pay you more than Matthew Stafford was crazy. So he knew he was on his way out there. No, they didn't value like that. That Stafford was like their son. Stafford was like their kinfolk. So, at least unlike Barry and Calvin Johnson, he got to walk away and control his own destination. He walked away and was like many other Detroit Lions that escaped the franchise, he won a Super Bowl. Matthew Stafford was able to escape the franchise, and he was able to win the Super Bowl. So, we can get mad all we want to, but at some point, you got to point the finger at the organization. But he had a point. He was the face of the defense. He was one of the cornerstones of the defense. He said the impact that he made on the field and in the locker room, even though there were discussions about Calvin Johnson, Matthew Stafford, and Ndamukong not being vocal leaders on the team. Nobody really led with an iron fist and rah, rah, rah. Kind of more vocal. You see Stafford in his older age in L.A., nobody was like the sheriff in Indianapolis. You know what I'm saying? Peyton Manning for those who know. Nobody led with an iron fist like Tom Brady did for this franchise, or like Ray Lewis did. You know what I'm saying? When you go across, Troy Polamalu, and nobody really, ruled with that iron fist in Detroit with them, and they making all that money. You know what I'm saying? And they didn't win. You know what I'm saying? They could have won. I remember Ndamukong Suh's crying that they lost to Dallas. And Stafford's just a janky. He's still a janky motherfucker. Only reason they won a Super Bowl is because Ja'Carrius Tart dropped that fucking pick in the NFC Championship game. He ain't been heard from since. But it is what it is. Check out Detroit Lions Talk playlist. Thumbs up the video. Share the video. Subscribe to the channel. Next subscribe button is the bell icon button. Hit all notifications. Increase your chance. Get notifications. We go live or drop video. Find me on X, Instagram, Spotify, Anchor, Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. Appreciate the love and support. Let me know what you girls and guys think in the comment section. Peace.